I definitely had plenty of imposter syndrome. You know, there were plenty of times when I was pinching myself, but also there was just this insane drive inside me of, you know, I didn't want to be left behind.
Welcome to the show. You founded a business called Monitise.
Mm-hmm.
At its peak, it had a market cap of 2 billion GBP. You then went on to found a number of other businesses, including Pollinate, Motive Ventures, and today running Cha-Ching. But let's start at the beginning. Professional rugby. You left school and you decided to try your hand at sport. Tell us how you went from there to today.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, and I, when you say I left school, I think that was by mutual agreement with the school. I think I was probably a bit disruptive and keen to get out and chase eggs in the mud with other rugby guys. Just to ensure we're not misquoting, the game was still amateur when I was playing. I did end up getting one contract just as the game turned professional, but ran into a big Tongan, which put that idea to an end quite painfully. But yeah, I mean, I was one of a sort of generation that was sent to boarding school quite young. I think some people liked that. I'm not sure I did. So I was pretty eager to get out. Felt quite prison-like. And came from a farming family, 7th generation farmers. Have an older brother who was always going to be the farmer. I was a bit of a run to the family because I had hay fever and didn't like shooting things, cry every time a moth hits my car windscreen. So I was seen as a bit of a softie. And but yeah, I loved my sport, skiing, rugby and other things. So went off to do that and had a really good run, particularly at sort of junior level. So county at under 21s, and then got an opportunity to play in Australia and then play for Saracens. And so I had a really, really good run of it. And actually, you know, still to this day, think so often about the rugby approach, the camaraderie, the different shapes and sizes, the different backgrounds, but the fact that everyone in the team knows that if someone else doesn't do their job, then you get hurt or you're never going to succeed. So, and that's something I've really enjoyed taking into business.
Yeah.
But yeah, when the sort of rugby plan diminished, I didn't really have a lot of options, candidly, because I'd not concentrated at school. So I think out of generosity, they gave me a couple of GCSEs that I probably didn't earn. And yeah, as many people know, and I'm sure a lot of your audience know, if you don't have a chance to start on the right rung of the ladder in the corporate world, you're probably best to go and try stuff yourself. So that's what I started doing, started sort of hustling really. Started in the sort of conference, sports hospitality world, you know, cold calling and cutting your teeth. And that was a really good learning curve. I always say to founders and to CEOs of big companies, you know, sales and learning how to turn a no into a yes is an absolute sacrosanct skill that you have to have in business. And it's funny, particularly in this country, we still have this sort of embarrassment about selling, and people say, oh, well, I'm not a salesman. We're all sales people. Everyone's a salesperson, because whether you're selling a story, whether you're trying to convince someone of something in a relationship, we're always selling. So I never had any issues, foibles about selling, and I enjoy it as long as I believe the product. And so that was a good grounding for me. And that's really led to, you know, all the businesses I've been involved in. You know, I have the self-awareness to know that I wasn't a great studier. I'm not a brilliant technologist. I know what I am good at. And so that tends to mean I find people that are, as we did in the rugby field, find better players than you. You know, if you're a captain of a rugby team and you sit in the changing room and you're about to go out on the field and you know you're the worst player on the team, but you're the captain, it's a pretty good start to the game. And so when I met this guy, Steve Atkinson, who we co-founded Monitise together, yeah, he was the genius, no question. He worked in Vodafone. He'd invented loads of new technology. He'd worked in the Defence Research Agency before that. Super smart guy, but had never raised money, had never tried to sell anything. And so I did that side of it and grew the business from there.
Awesome. Yeah, not the first Englishman to run into a Tongan and lose out.
Exactly.
Monitise then. So your co-founder was a bit older than you, a bit more experienced?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so how did you come up with the idea? How did that start? As you said, uneducated relatively, good background in sport, had some good perseverance probably from doing the cold calling and the hustling, your own words. But how did Monitise come out?
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, serendipity. I'm, feel very, very blessed in so many ways in my life. And I'm a great believer in manifestation and serendipity. You just got to have your ears open, 2 ears and 1 mouth. So just before Monitise, I'd got a job for a really interesting company called ePolitics. I was one of the founding guys at ePolitics, sales guy. And ePolitics was fascinating because it was at the time that Tony Blair was sort of peak of his powers. And he was talking about broadband Britain and how everyone needed to get online. And that was the race to the digital world. But he wasn't really being well supported in the House of Commons because only 49 out of 659 MPs had a website. And so a very clever group of people that published the House magazine, which is like your rag mag. It's like your university rag mag of Parliament, where they all used to write stories and, say, I'm outraged at this and all, It was actually the most expensive advertising medium in paper in the world at that time, because a page of advertising in the House magazine cost 10 grand. But of course, it's an audience of 659 people that own 400 billion GDP of spend. So it was a really interesting business, and they were trying to go online like everyone else in 1999. And so we came up with this multi-sided marketplace business model, which is something that, I'm very passionate about now in all my businesses. So, who's the consumer, who's the product provider, and how do you match them? So we got all the MPs online by offering them free websites that we would administer. So we managed it. So their parliamentary officer or their public affairs person would just send us the stuff they wanted to say, So are these masts for mobile phones going to melt our ears? There's too many potholes on my road, all that sort of stuff. So we would upload that. And that gave us our captive audience. What we then did is went out and looked at every organisation, campaign group, Association of Left-Footed Goalkeepers, the Owl Protectors, anyone that wanted to have a point of view to Parliament, and we offered to build them a site that went within the portal, so microsites, and the technology was something called XML meta tagging, which in the day was sort of the early stages of AI, really. And so what happened is someone would stand up in the House of Commons, early day motion, and say, it's outrageous. I was walking past my Barclays Bank the other day and the ATM wasn't working. And then anyone that wanted to have a point of view on why the ATM might not be working, or why villages should have ATMs so that older people can get cash out without having to go to the local town, you were able to put your messages into this portal. So we ended up becoming this sort of digital lobbying firm. We ended up with 350 clients in a year. It's amazing. And we sponsored the party conferences. We had the ePolitics brand on the lanyards. I got to know lots of back in the day when politicians were real public servants, and they really, really cared about their particular issues. It was a great time, actually. Some amazing political leaders. And so I then built this amazing network. I would find myself in number 10 Downing Street. I was find myself in the House of Commons every day. I would find myself asked to go and meet the CEO of the CBE, the Director General, Digby Jones, or I would go and see the CEO of BP. And like any natural salesperson and someone that's very fascinated by humankind and loves spending time with human beings, I was just in the university of life. I was just learning as much as I could, as fast as possible. And I suppose that was perceived quite rightly as authentic. Most people are asking you a question because they're trying to get you to agree. I was genuinely saying, tell me about your problems, because I want to learn about it. And so out of that, Vodafone became quite a big client. And Steve was the guy at Vodafone who was doing all the thinking about 3G licenses, what could mobile phones do in the world beyond text and Snake, which is the only thing you used to be able to do on your phones. And he'd come up with the idea of M-Pesa. And M-Pesa is now a very, very famous sort of FinTech company that was deployed in Kenya. And when M-Pesa was deployed in Kenya, only 10% of the Kenyan market was banked, and now 39% of the Kenyan market is banked. So you imagine the GDP contribution of that. And it was using mobile phones to do the last mile because no bank could be bothered to go and put a branch in a township. And so I challenged Steve and said, why couldn't you do that in the Western world? And he said, well, because, banks are so hard to work with and, we need to own the customer. And so it was a really sort of complex situation. And one of the other companies that had been a client of ePolitics was Link, the ATM network, the Link Interchange Network, which was owned by the banks, and every bank was plugged into it on a global standard called ISO 8583. So the reason you can use your bank card wherever you go in the world is because of ISO 8583. And I said to Steve one day, he was driving down the motorway, I think, with a cigarette on the go, coffee in between his knees, driving like a loony, which he always did. And I rang him and I said, could we do something with Link? And it was a sort of come to Jesus moment. And he said, well, yeah, because if you think of it, ATMs are standardized, mobile phones are standardized. If we could use those two platforms to create a mobile ATM, which is what Monitise was first called, then at least you'd be able to do basic things on your mobile phone, but you wouldn't have to start from scratch. So the banks wouldn't have to lift up the bonnet and deep integrations and all the rest of it. And that's how it began.
Literally the death of the in-person bank today started there.
Absolutely.
We don't know anything else now.
Yeah.
Majority, if you got a bank today, you wouldn't know anything else than mobile banking.
Correct.
How old were you when you started Monitise?
So I was about 28.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in your mid to late 20s, and you are talking to CEO of people, maybe at the time you didn't feel like you had any right to speak to. You're going into 10 Downing Street at the age of 28. What was that like?
Yeah, I think I definitely had plenty of imposter syndrome. There were plenty of times when I was pinching myself, but also there was just this insane drive inside me of, I didn't want to be left behind. Obviously, rugby had taught me elements of discipline and training and not giving up. But also in the background, the backstory was that our family farm had a big chunk of it had been lost through Lloyd's of London. We'd become a big investor in the Lloyd's of London insurance markets in the 90s. And unfortunately, it had gone very badly, as it did for many, many landowners. And I had this real dream that I would be able to buy elements of the farm back, particularly the farmhouse. And so that just kept going. So it was almost like anything that was in my way was just another person that I had to smash. And my brother and I fortunately were able to get the farm back in 2014, which was amazing. So I just didn't have time to feel intimidated by it.
Love that. So Monitise, I want to come back to your sort of growing up sort of stage of your life in a minute, but let's go to Monitise then. So the summary is you grew a very successful company. I'm happy to say that. I'm sure you probably agree. To a 2 billion sterling market cap. Impressive. Year one. How did it go? First entrepreneurial journey. Can you remember what that was like, getting the first few hundred clients, you said?
It was, it was carnage. I was living in a small cottage up in Bishop Stortford at the time. And, candidly didn't have any money in the bank. And, if you're doing a startup, which everyone feels they want to do until they actually do it and realizes you can't pay the bills and all the rest of it. So because neither Steve or I had any track record in raising money before, we didn't feel the VC community or the PE community was the right way to go. And Steve had worked with a lot of big technology companies in Vodafone. So we started talking to some other tech companies about would they be interested in this platform or this idea. And we actually ended up getting our first round of investment from Morse. And Morse was a sort of FTSE 250 reseller of Sun, HP and IBM technology. Their big challenge was that they had no intellectual property, but basically it was the speed of their forklifts that was their only differentiator. And so they were going, how do we start to develop our own intellectual property? And so they really liked the idea. They put some capital in, but they really, put the thumb screws on us. And so I had to commute. They're based in Brentford by that big GlaxoSmithKline building on the side of the A40. And I commuted every day, left at 5 in the morning to get ahead of the traffic, usually get home at 10 o'clock at night. And really we were just scrambling around trying to get the thing going. And like every tech startup, massively underestimated the complexity, not just the technology complexity, but actually the not invented here, the protectionism, middle managers in banks that were saying, oh, but I've just been hired to look at mobile, so why do I want you guys to have the answer? Because I want to spend a year writing strategy documents. And so that's really when I came into my own, learned as much as I could about strategic selling, a particular methodology called Miller-Hyman strategic selling, which is a really helpful way to understand the complexities of big organizations. One of the massive challenges is lots of people tell you they're the formal buyer, but very few have the right to sign a check. And so you spend an awful lot of time wasted with middle managers who are actually just trying to suck you dry of intellectual property so they can look smart in front of their boss and their boss's boss. And so I sort of became quite agile and working my way through. And because I'd built this amazing black book, this great network community around e-politics, I was able to use that. You're only 1 degree separated. I could ring the CBI, they would introduce me to a bank. But we thought we'd be live in 2 years. It took us 4 to get our first transaction out the door.
Wow. So 4 years in, the story goes that 10 years in, and you have 1,800 employees, you have global presence. When did it hit you that you had built something to the size of what we know Monitise became?
We were sort of recognised quite early. We had to, so basically we were part of Morse, we're a subsidiary, because they own the majority of the company. So, golden rule for me as an entrepreneur is 10% of big numbers, a lot better than 100% nothing. And
for sure,
so many entrepreneurs don't want to dilute. And I just think that's that almost demonstrates your ambition from day one. If you're not prepared to sell equity, you're not going to scale a business, as far as I'm concerned. Very few. I mean, 1 in a billion, you can grow organically to a huge company. So I had no issue with that. But it was very clear that Morse had their own battles to fight. We had got to, I think we're about a 30-person company by then, and we needed to go on our own path. And we had a brilliant chairman at Morse, a guy called Richard Lapthorne, who was also the chairman of Cable and Wireless. And he came up with this idea of a share split. So he did a split between Monitise and Morse. So every shareholder in Morse got 1 share in Monitise for free, basically. And then it was up to them whether they wanted to sell down Morse if they thought that Morse was not going to go anywhere, or sell down Monitise if they thought we were all lunatics. And it actually worked really well. It was a clever transaction. We listed on the AIM market at about a 21 million market cap business. And first FinTech to sort of get our name out there. And then the global financial crisis happened 3 weeks later. So our share price went from 22.5p to 2.25p in about 2 weeks. Luckily, we had enough cash on the balance sheet to keep going. But that was brutal. And so that's when I first realized not that we were successful, but that I was a cork in the ocean.
Sure.
And there were things that were just out of my control that were going to be very, very hard for me to learn and to manage, and managing the city and investment bankers and all of that stuff. So I really did learn the hard way. On the flip side, and of course, all the things that we can't predict, because the banks had all gone into such a meltdown, all their innovation budgets disappeared, which meant they needed us to help them innovate. So had that not happened, we would never have got Royal Bank of Scotland, NatWest, First Direct, HSBC, because they just were printing money. As we know, it turned out to be paper money in many cases, but they were printing money. So they had these armies of middle managers that all wanted to play with new tech, and they were never going to let us be successful. So actually the GFC was quite helpful for us. And then we got recognised in 2007 as the Tech Pioneer of the Year at the World Economic Forum, which was just mad. We were the first UK company to do it. I went and collected an award from Kofi Annan. And so suddenly you thought, this is really, we're onto something here. And things like that really helped us get a city audience that was interested. However, one of the great challenges with the stock exchange, which is well publicised today in the UK, is the lack of liquidity. We have this real problem that people are really looking for value stocks. They'd much prefer to go into a really big company that's going to give them 3% growth a year than go for the moonshot, which of course in the US is the complete opposite. So every year our share price would sort of trickle down. And the way I dealt with that is this great rule on AIM, still exists today, where you can issue 10% of your equity without having to go through a whole prospectus process with your shareholders. So if you're a company of 30 million, you can raise another 3 million in pretty short order, like 6 weeks. And we used that and invited strategic investors to come and invest in the company to remind the city that even though they didn't understand what we were doing, others did. And our first big one was Standard Chartered Bank, and that got followed by Visa. And then all of a sudden, people went, hold on a sec. We thought these guys just did balance inquiries over the mobile phone. Why would Visa be invested in this business? And then it started to really motor. And it was around I think I got Entrepreneur of the Year in 2011. And it was around the time of the Olympics in 2012, which Visa was the main sponsor of, which was lovely because it meant I got to go to the Olympics a lot, that David Cameron asked me to be his business ambassador for FinTech. And one of the amazing things then was, of course, to globalise your business. If you're getting on a plane with the Prime Minister and everyone else on these trade missions, it gives you a fair bit of gravitas.
Yeah, absolutely. So perfect segue. Monitise. When did you decide to step away from that business, or for it to be a good idea to step away from that business? Which then, of course, led you on to what you just mentioned there, which is the British ambassador to FinTech.
Yeah, I way too late is the answer to your question. I was CEO for way too long. 15 years is too long to be a CEO of any company, particularly one you've been the founder of. And I think that contributed a lot to Monitise having a tough ending. You know, we went from, I think at the time I left, we were was about considering leaving, about $1 billion market cap, and it dropped to 150 million market cap. I was fatigued. I'd bought the farm back. So it's an amazing thing, you know, that ambition, that destination. You look at Johnny Wilkinson after he won the World Cup, 14 injuries in the next year. Yeah, you sort of get to that destination, to that peak, to that summit, and then suddenly the adrenaline drops and all the rest of it. And my son had just arrived as well, so there was lots of contributing factors. But I was definitely taking my eye off the ball, and so and I was very flattered by the fact that I'd been awarded a gong and that I was the business ambassador, and I really enjoyed, back to my politics days, I've gone full circle. I really enjoy being right on the edge of the public sector. I really enjoy working particularly with great prime ministers and ministers and doing trade deals, and which is what I was doing. And I was also the founding chairman of Innovate Finance, the FinTech trade body. So I was very busy doing other stuff, and I should have been far more humble and said, look, I just can't do this. A year too late, I brought in a co-CEO, a lady called Elizabeth Hughes, who'd been the president of Visa. But really by then, there was just too much fixing of the business to do. So I then transitioned into doing, pretty much public service, retrospectively earning my gong. And then obviously came up with Motive with a group of others.
Awesome. So let's jump back in time then. So childhood, you self-confessed, not the best student. Parents, entrepreneurship, was it in your blood? Talk me through why entrepreneurship came to your path so strongly in your 20s. Was that something you think was founded, let's say, in your early years?
I think from a DNA perspective, all farmers are entrepreneurs.
100%.
They whinge about it a lot, but and also you asked, a great question earlier about the tough times and that imposter syndrome. One of the things you intuitively learn as a farmer is not everything's in your control. You can have the best build up to a harvest, and then force majeure comes along and it rains for 3 weeks, right? So it's sort of embedded in you that not everything's in your control. You're always playing against the elements. And I definitely have that in me, and I had that as a rugby player as well. So my father was an incredibly entrepreneurial thinker. He won the Churchill Scholarship for pioneering pick your own fruit and tabletop, so he didn't have to hurt your back and all the rest of it. He probably would say now, no, we had a fantastic party for his 80th at the weekend.
Amazing.
Yeah, he should have surrounded himself like I did with people that complimented him. He tried to do everything himself. And, in the agricultural industry particularly, there aren't thousands of people that are great CFOs or, great money managers or whatever it might be. So I think it was very hard for Dad to scale things, although he had some brilliant ideas, some of which were very successful. So I think it was in there. My brother Jonathan, who now runs the farm, is the perfect blend because he has an entrepreneurial brain, but he's very, very practical. And he's taken the farm. I think the year that we got the farmhouse back, the farm would have been turning over, 50,000, and it'll do in the millions now. He'll have 300,000 people through the farm this year. He's got a retail outlet. He's got a farm shop. He does really well at pumpkins, but he's done it in a way I wouldn't have, and therefore better than me, because I'm always going for the moonshot, and he's quite happy to just expand by 10% each year. So we're a blend in the family, but I think it's there. I think all through the generations. My great grandfather bought what was a livestock farm based in Cornwall all the way up to Essex to find better soil. So we've always been explorers.
I love that. So your dad, definitely an entrepreneur. There's no doubt about that. But he went through troubles. This was during your childhood. How did that hit you, seeing that from someone who wasn't the entrepreneurial mind you are today, obviously, but at the time, maybe the foundations of that? What was that like in like the home environment, seeing potentially like the negative side of entrepreneurship? Yeah,
I mean, I think I probably wasn't as in the room to see that as most would have been. I think my brother would have observed it much better than me. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, boarding school for me was a very fracturing experience. So partly because we lived at this lovely farmhouse, my dad was ridiculously generous and took us on lovely holidays and skiing, and we had lots of fun. And so going back to school was like Chinese torture. And so, I spent a lot of my time, and back in those days, we didn't have mobile phones. You had to clean your black shoes, to a certain level to get your 10p to call your folks on a Sunday morning. So the hardship for me was always there, and I just felt so liberated when I got out of school. I probably wasn't as aware of and I wasn't into the farm. So whereas my brother would have been seeing that we'd had a bad year, I probably just took everything for granted too much. But yeah, my dad, what's that great Churchill quote? If you're going through hell, keep going. Yeah, my dad definitely has an element of being able to do the hard yards.
Awesome. So then, talking about hard yards, rugby, definitely a passion point for you.
Yeah.
Definitely a competitive person. You wouldn't have made it to any level of rugby without being a competitive person. Do you feel that has transitioned into today? Or maybe through your career, did you ever find yourself measuring yourself against others, being, I want to get to a certain point? Or was it the intrinsic childhood sort of trauma of losing that farm and wanting to buy that back, which of course you did do, which is an amazing story?
Yeah, I think, again, really good question. I think actually the thing I've carried most with me from rugby is camaraderie. It's teamwork. I think compounded by the loneliness of school, rugby became but you hear so many stories, you see so many movies of people that join the military and that becomes their family. And if you look at famous successful teams like Saracens or that England 2003 team, you can just tell there's a brothership there. There's a mateness that is impossible to replicate. And I would proudly say, and we've won many awards as being the best place to work in the industry in all my companies. That is what I took most out of rugby. I would have said my competitive edge only came from wanting the team to be successful. I wasn't, and that held me back. I mean, I was not, I would cut the corners at training, and I do enjoy the social side of rugby too much to have ever been a super athlete. But for me, it was the fact I didn't want to let my mates down. And that's how I feel in business. Probably too much. I again, back to your question on Monitise, when we had 1,700 people, did we need all 1,700? No. If you'd had a different CEO, it would have been 1,200. And the company probably wouldn't have got into as much trouble, but I couldn't bear the idea of letting people go. So my weaknesses and strengths are very, very close to each other.
So interesting. So then let's take your step away from being a CEO and you go into public service, advisory positions to prime ministers.
Yeah.
Very awesome position to be. You did that for over a decade. How was that?
I loved it. I mean, I really miss it. And look, I'm biased. I know there'll be people yelling at the screen or into their headphones hearing me say this, because I know that people regret Brexit in such an intense and understandably intense way. It's so sad for me that that's the thing David Cameron's remembered for, because he was just a superb Prime Minister. And that's not just my point of view. If you look at the KPIs of the UK pre-Brexit, third fastest growing country in the Western economy, we'd had the Olympics, we still had the glow of that, things were going really well. And from a businessman's perspective, from an entrepreneur's perspective, number 10 and number 11 had never been more open in history. So that corridor between number 10 and number 11, George Osborne and David Cameron, usually that door's shut very firmly. You know, if you think of prime ministers and chancellors that don't get on well, those two got on super well, and business was at the heart of everything they were doing. And the thing I liked most, and feel proud that I contributed to this, is that trade missions historically have been a lot of big fat cats with braces and striped shirts getting on planes and going out to do these big monster deals. What that government did is fill planes with entrepreneurs and small businesses. And that was awesome, because if you're a small company and you get to go with the Prime Minister and sign your first deal in Africa or your first deal in Asia, it's game changing. Whereas, you know, these other big companies have the infrastructure, they should be doing it anyway. So I love that side of it, and I'm incredibly proud of what we did in FinTech, to end up with 10% global market share, the sandbox, Innovate Finance, 73,000 new jobs, 34 billion of inward investment. We now have 17 unicorns. So that was, none of that was by chance. That there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Some people that never get the mentions, Gwyneth Nurse, who's the lady who works in the Treasury, who runs FinTech now, oversees it all. You know, she was quietly behind the scenes lobbying other departments that didn't even understand FinTech to explain how important it was. There were so many people doing stuff to make it work. And my sadness at the moment, because the fourth industrial revolution should be the greatest opportunity the UK's ever had in the fusion industries. We have right touch regulation, we have rule of law, we have great intellectual capital, great creativity, great universities, common business language, we have the embassies, we have all this stuff going for us, and we're so navel gazing at the moment, and the world's moving super fast. So, you know, we've got to find what's our next FinTech. Is it medtech? Is it creative tech? Is it energy tech? What are we doing in energy? All this stuff, and we don't have to own it. We don't have to compete with India on outsourcing. We don't have to compete with China on manufacturing, but we've got to get 10% market share in 5 or 6 industries, and we've got to do it quick.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, the vast majority of our British economy made up of small and medium enterprise businesses. Pollinate, which is a business you founded, was all about providing SMEs with the provision of banking. Yeah. Talk me through that. That was clearly a foundational point for you in terms of your pure focus towards SMEs.
100%, and farmer, shopkeeper, nation of shopkeepers. And actually that came through another relationship. So a guy called Ross McEwen, who was the CEO of NatWest Bank at the time, great business leader, great banker, great CEO. And he had a real passion for small business because his daughter, Hannah, had a coffee shop in Clapham. And he used to go at the weekends and put the penny on and do the washing up and all the rest of it. And you may remember that in the global financial crisis, Royal Bank of Scotland owned WorldPay, which became one of the world's largest merchant acquirers. They had to sell it under duress over a weekend for $2 billion, and it then ended up being worth $28 billion. So Ross was not only frustrated by the fact they'd lost all that equity value, but also his daughter was using WorldPay and it was a terrible service. And, you know, they wouldn't replace the machine for 5 days, and it was all sort of old tech. And so he had this passion, and Ross and I were good mates. And he said, I really want to, you know, get back into merchant acquiring. We're seeing Square and some of these other great techs come and steal market share from us. And so I said, well, do you want me to get a team together and have a look at it? And that was the formation of Pollinate. Awesome.
And then what's your involvement in that today?
So still a shareholder and still very much an ambassador advisor for Pollinate. Support the management team and the board through my contacts and network. MasterCard's a shareholder, and I do an awful lot of work with MasterCard, and NatWest are obviously a major shareholder as well. So help wherever I can.
Yeah, awesome. So FinTech, again, something that you've had a lot of involvement with in the last sort of period of your career. High regulation typically, some would say harder to innovate. How do you see the innovation path being, I don't want to say gifted, but how do we guide SMEs and startups in this country to provide better offerings and innovations in FinTech?
Yeah, this is critical. So we've sort of finished chapter 1 of FinTech, and we wrote the Khalifa Review, of which I was a co-chair, to review what's happened in FinTech and how we got here. And then there were a number of asks of the government to take forward to make sure we don't lose our seat at the table. And the regulation point is so important, and we call it right touch regulation. If you go to some markets, anyone other than a major incumbent bank is just regulated out. Go to other markets, it's a bit of a Wild West sort of frontier, and anyone can do anything. And what the UK has traditionally been very good at is finding the right touch. So supporting, we have the sandbox. If you're a startup, you can go to the sandbox, you can explain what you're trying to do. Insurance is starting to happen a lot as well, InsurTech. But we've got to get back to that open energy and sharing of resources that we had under that previous government. And I know that Janine at Innovate Finance and Charlotte Crosswell at CFIT and Ron Khalifa and others are working very hard with this government to explain the importance of FinTech, but there's no reason at all why we can't go to 20% global market share. My worry at the moment is it feels like we're dribbling from 10 down to 6.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting next period for sure in that space. What other spaces are you interested in? Obviously, FinTech's been a large part of your life. Where do you see the next trends coming? And you mentioned sort of, if we're looking at it from a British economy perspective, where we're going to have those next 5-10+% sort of market shares in. Is there any other spaces that are catching your eye? You're clearly someone who has an eye for these things, especially obviously in the FinTech space, but I know it'll be in other spaces too. Which ones catch your eye?
Yeah, I mean, I call it a not so trivial pursuit. So if you think of it like a trivial pursuit counter, sort of 6 bits of cheese. So if we can replicate what we did in FinTech in MedTech, which we proved during the lockdown, during the pandemic, that we could get that vaccine out very quickly. We've got great universities, great hospitals. So I think MedTech and health tech is huge. Everyone knows how creative we are. So entertainment tech, all the creators, the music industry, all of those standards, digital rights management. I think that's super interesting. And our rule of law is very helpful in that. And that's a Wild West at the moment. You see an OpenAI, huge. I thought Justine Roberts, the CEO of Mumsnet, which is a great business, she's taken on this kind of campaign to say, it's not okay for OpenAI to just take everyone's creative work, your creative work, this great creative business you have. It's not okay for that to be free, right? And Wikipedia have been saying this for a very, very long time. We can't take other people's intellectual property and just give it away for free. We've got to find a way of monetizing that for the creators. So I think entertainment, music, creative tech is really interesting. Energy tech. If you look in the last 3 weeks, we've seen more announcements about nuclear, these small nuclear reactors, which ironically are needed because every big tech company is building 3 data centers a week, which don't have power, which is having an impact on the grid. But they're saying if we get AI out there, AI will solve it. My worry is if you ask AI what to do for the planet, it'll say get rid of human beings. But I think energy tech is really interesting. You've then got reg tech, so regulatory technology. UK is extremely well placed for that. And then I think transport tech's very interesting as well. Very interested in transport tech. We've seen a bit of a backlash against electric cars now and the convenience or not as the case may be. And cost. But I think, you're not going to stop now this move to carbon zero, to innovate zero. We have a great business here in the UK called Smart Cities World, which is sort of one of the leading thinkers and platforms for cities. So about 76% of the negative impact on the planet is through urban environments like cities. So they host a big event every year where we have about 40 of the top mayors in the world come here and share best practice around transit and the built environment and this sort of stuff. But I think the UK has got a huge role to play in that green tech space as well.
Yeah, super interesting. So let's talk about founders right back at the early stage. So another entity that you're a part of is Motive Partners.
Yeah.
That's actually how we connected through an investment made by Motive into Opus. So Opus is a members community for sort of builders in the UK, but especially London and the Middle East.
It's a great initiative. Yeah.
Great initiative. Talk us through that decision for Motive to be involved with Opus and sort of maybe a bit more about what Opus is.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to my comment on the World Economic Forum and the tech pioneer thing. One of the things that I found so rewarding and refreshing when I got there is, Bill Clinton was there, Tony Blair was there, Kofi Annan was there, all these world leaders were there. But they really rolled out the red carpet for the next generation. It was the tech pioneers, Larry and Sergey were there from Google, and their focus was who are the next generation of thinkers that are going to solve the world's challenges. And for me, that's what Opus is all about. And if you're a private equity firm, if you're a VC firm, if you're an investor, yes, of course you want someone with grey hair there watching you. We get that. That's why you have boards. That's why you have to blend like a rugby team, different skills. But actually, the energy that's required, that self-belief, that energy, is going to come from the next generation. People in their 20s and 30s, and that's why they formed Opus. And obviously, Sam, who's the founder, and Princess Beatrice, who's a great patron and supporter of it. It's an amazing community, and again, the UK does very well at creating these communities and these clusters, as we did here in Canary Wharf around FinTech. Opus, like the YPO and these other things, is so important so that people don't feel as isolated and as alone as I did at boarding school and I did when I first set up Monitise, because there weren't many around. I mean, if you look at what Brett Hoberman and his team have done with Founders Forum, it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible what they've done. He's been so tenacious and kept driving it. And that's clearly a global destination now in its own right. But the more of these communities we can have, the more we are going to learn. 2 ears and 1 mouth. I learned more from my 11-year-old son about how to use tech than I ever knew. So we've got to listen.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as you said, being a founder is lonely. It can be an exceptionally lonely journey. So let's talk about support. And let's go specifically around governmental support and regulations. And maybe let's talk about how it's compared to the US. I would like to touch upon culture in a second. And there is definitely a culture gap between the US and the UK and mentality towards startups. SEIS, CIS have been extremely essential to supporting the growth of startups in the UK. How do you think we can do more?
Well, my golden rule with government is never offer them veto or ask them for permission, right? Because by doing one, you do the other. If you say to government, I need permission to do something, they're going to say, we've now got a veto on it. So government is great for convening. Government is a great platform. Government is important to regulate and to keep people safe. Government is never going to help you build your business, right? It's not going to. And a lot of people apply for grants and think that that's going to solve everything. It's part of the pot, it's part of the recipe, but it's not everything. My massive concern at the moment, particularly with leading up to this budget, is, and this, by the way, this isn't a party political broadcast because it's true across the entire House. There are very few politicians that have built and run businesses. So they look at things at a macro level. They look at numbers. They look at, it's a bit like the terrible airlines. Someone sitting in an office somewhere decides you can fit another 20 seats in the plane. They never think about the person that's going to travel 12 hours on that flight. It's a similar thing. And if you're a founder and you're trying to raise your first 250 grand and they take away the ability for someone to offset that against tax losses, you are immediately killing tens of thousands of small companies, day one. And so that's really important. I think anything this government or any government can do to encourage better use of pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, encouraging the insurance markets to invest in funds that then invest in founders. I think, ultra high net worth families and foundations that are investing in small businesses need to be incentivized to do it. We've got some fantastic, go back to things like the Rowntree Foundation, the Templeton Foundation, Cadbury's, all these amazing founders then set up these foundations to help the next generation. they should be rewarded. They've already paid tax. They've already paid income tax. They've already paid capital gains tax. So they should be getting incentives to let that money flow. And it's a circular thing. And so when you go to the US, bridging into your culture question, you know, it's a totally different mindset. Everyone who's made money wants to reinvest that money to create the next generation. Everyone that's a VC knows that 7 out of the 10 are going to fail, 2 are going to do okay, and 1's going to be a moonshot. That's just how they think. We have this terrible culture in the UK, even still today, where people look down into their soup when you say you're an entrepreneur. It's just, that means you couldn't get a proper job.
Yep.
It's just crazy. Would you imagine saying that to Shakespeare? Would you say that to an inventor? It's all retrospective. So people celebrate the creation of penicillin, but would have thought that he was a nutter when he was looking for it. I mean, we've got to remember that the founders are the people that are solving the world's problems. And Bill Gates talks about this a lot. His favorite book is a book called Abundance, which is a fantastic book. And it's so encouraging because it points out all the big problems we've got in the world, whether that's climate, food, water, but then it mentions hundreds of examples of founders that are solving those issues. And so when the media gets so down on the world, I wish they would just balance it by saying, oh, but by the way, you know, banana, one of the ones that my colleague and friend Pelos and I are looking at the moment is banana cancer. So banana cancer is a big thing. Cocoa bean cancer is a really, really big thing. But they're already at light speed finding solutions to fix it. We need to celebrate these things.
Yeah, 100%. I think the thing is about the British culture as well is I think just exactly what you said. There's no business shower to celebrate someone who started a new business, but why not? There should be someone sitting there with your friends, and it doesn't matter. I ran events at university, you know, classic student night type event, and people are asking for discounts rather than saying, I want to pay full price to support you. Okay, fine, budget sensitive students, but I think that translates into my adult life post-university, where it's more of a, you're doing this, could I have a discount, or what can I get from that, rather than, right, let me engage with that social media post, let me connect you with this person because they might be able to help you. Yeah, that's completely the wrong way around if we want to be innovative in this country. Whilst in the US, you know, there's a lot of pros and cons for both sides of the culture sort of divide, but the US, it's like, right, you're going to be unicorn, and I'll let you see if you can get there before I say anything else. Yeah. Which is crazy. Also the fear of failure thing. They just don't have a fear of failure. And any American investor that you talk to, and I've raised, I think now 1.85 billion sterling in 20 years, and probably half of that has come from the US. The first thing they ask you is how many times have you failed? But they're not asking you in a negative way, they're asking you in a positive way, because they know you've learned. You wouldn't keep coming back and making the same mistakes. And so they just have this, you know, high five, well done, you know, well done for realizing early that you were on the wrong path and you started something new, or you pivoted. You know, all these words that you and I as entrepreneurs know and use. You go and talk to someone in the UK in a pension fund about pivot, and they think you're a sailor. I mean, it's... Yeah, it's crazy. Let's talk about that exact thing then. So what should a founder do that they potentially don't do quick enough that you've seen time and time again? Yeah, I mean, it's all about feedback, isn't it? And it's surrounding yourself with people that challenge you, not agree with you. And, you know, in fact, I had this chat with my team the other day, because we all get on really well. And you know, I'm sort of at a stage of life where I sort of have a no dickheads rule. So I like working with people that, you know, I get on well with, but I find myself already falling into the worst trap, which is you can't surround yourself with clones. You have to have people that think differently. You have to have people that are going to ask you the tough questions, and you have to have the self-confidence to overrule them, but only when you've listened. And so one of the things I encourage all founders to do is get an advisory board as soon as you can. And everyone goes, well, how would I go about getting an advisory? Who would want to advise me? It's the complete opposite. There are so many successful people that want to help startups. They don't know how to find them, and the startups don't know how to find them. Just pick up the phone. Just write them an email. Say, I'm in a health tech startup. I saw that you were really successful in GlaxoSmithKline. Would you consider being an advisor to me? You don't have to pay them a fortune. Give them a bit of sweet equity, but meet them and listen to them.
because so many founders think they've come up with the cleverest widget in the world. I can guarantee if it's a clever widget, 1,000 other people are building the same thing. So you've got to take that feedback as quickly as you can, triangulate it. Don't always think you have to be the smartest guy in the room. You know, I say to all my team, I much prefer to win the contract than the argument. So you just be humble enough to get yourself up and running, take feedback from as many people as possible, have a reflective day a week. And I'm not talking about, you don't have to go into Zen. I just mean walking's a hugely important thing. I know everyone talks about exercise and swimming and running and all, and that's great. Fitness is really important. But I think walking is a really good thing for founders to do. Go and find a park, take some tough feedback. It hurts, it stings when someone tells you your baby's ugly. Go and walk and look at it from their perspective, and then come back either with fresh confidence and say, actually, I disagree for the following 5 reasons, or say, thank you, that's been really helpful, I'm now going to pivot.
Yeah, 100%. I can advocate for advisory boards. We have one, Shake Content, a great board. We have not paid them. We offer them like incentives in different ways. And we had, I think, a choice of about 10 people that contacted me when I put those sort of feelers out into a space, into a community, onto my LinkedIn, just putting myself out there, and just said, like, as you say, I don't know everything. And there's so many different areas. We've got someone who specializes in sales, which is a place I consider myself quite strong, but still can always be better. Someone in HR tech who's going to help me with anything people and culture. Someone who has built from sort of 1 to 10 to 20 million, which I want to get to, but haven't been before. So just trying to find that person that could genuinely be same age, younger, 1 year older than you. Age just doesn't matter, but they are maybe just that 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, and they will let them make the mistakes, and then tell you the mistakes they made, because then you won't make them.
Shared experience.
You'll catch up quicker.
Absolutely.
Next 5 years, you've done quite a bit in the last 5, 10, 15 years. What do you want to achieve in the next 5 years?
I want to continue enjoying what I do. I'm very blessed, as I said. Have an amazing wife and a new baby daughter who's 1 year old.
Congrats.
We've always been able to. My wife's been very successful in her field. We've always been able to travel together because she can work remotely. We love traveling. We sort of live in a horizontal flow rather than the vertical hierarchy of life that the UK tries to impose on you. Be in the office at this time, do this many hours work, do all that stuff. So I think continue that. But my greatest pleasure is just helping other people. It's always been the way. I got it from my mum, and so me and the team are working with about 25 startups at the moment in various different ways, helping them with capital raising, putting together advisory boards, internationalization, finding talent, all that sort of stuff. And that's my greatest pleasure. So more of that, plenty of traveling with the family, continue to watch a lot of rugby, and support great entrepreneurs like you. Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you. If you could start any business, you can keep your experience, no personal money that you're allowed to invest. What business would you go after today? And it could be a passion point. It can be something you truly believe in, or it could be something that you do just want to go and scale. What would you do?
There's a company that we're advising. So one of the members of my team, Emilio, is advising a company I wish I'd founded.
Okay.
Which is a company called C-Works, founded by a guy called Paul Humphreys. And this deals with something in the music industry called the black box. And the black box in the music industry is all the unpaid fees that someone who wrote a song hasn't been paid yet. And no one knows how to identify where those fees are coming from. So was it in a concert hall? Was it in a pub? Was it in a restaurant? Was it at the Olympics? Where was it? And Paul used to work in the FCA, so he understands data and algorithmic trading and all this stuff. And he's building a business, and we're helping him, which basically is going to get these people paid back for the songs that they've written. And having seen the revolution of FinTech and open APIs and open data and what we can now do to, the reason that Revolut and all these banks offer you amazing user experiences, they weren't encumbered by old platforms. I think the re-platformatization of the entertainment industry is just beginning, and it absolutely excites me to bits. And so yeah, that's a space that I want to understand better and play some time in.
Amazing. What's the concert that you're going to go to that you wish you could go to? Which is your favorite artist or band?
Oh, I've got such an eclectic. Actually, my brother-in-law, the guy I mentioned, Emilio, he's a very talented singer-songwriter. So when he starts playing big gigs, but I'm taking Jacob, my son, to Coldplay next year, and we're very lucky as a whole family. We're going to see Paul McCartney, which would be a great one to sort of say goodbye to. But I'm an Simon and Garfunkel fan. I told you I was soppy.
I mean, look, I'm not going to judge you on that one, but awesome. So over the next few years, you have a number of advisory positions. Yep. You still have today. You were at Westminster this morning. Yep. You're a busy guy. Yeah. You've got a young family. Yep. How the hell do you manage your time?
I look at time in a very different ways. I think I genuinely, to most people, I think a lot of people allow time to constrain their thinking. I am very lucky, Sophia. My soulmate is very understanding. I don't have an on-off switch. If I need to be on a call at 3 a.m, I'm on a call at 3 a.m. And yeah, I probably do still take myself to the edge probably once a year. It used to be every 6 weeks when I was building Monitise. So I still have to learn to not overdo it. But when I'm having fun, I can't stop really. So I'll keep doing it. And, hopefully if I look back in 5 years' time, there's been 3 or 4 companies founders that I've helped get to unicorn status, and that'll make me very happy.
Yeah, awesome. So 17 British unicorns, going to be 20 at your hand.
That's it.
Love that. Last but not least, luck or talent? What do you think is more important as a founder?
Well, manifestation really, which is a combination of the two. And manifestation in the way I describe it is you have to do both. You have to do the hard yards. You have to be brave in the sense of knowing if you're going wrong and accept it. That's the hardest thing for most people. That word, that biological feeling of humiliation when you were young and your parents said, stop showing off in front of your friends around the dinner table, and it was just the worst thing anyone could ever say to you. You know, Jacob now, when I try and drop him off at school, he gives me the best handoff. He's like, Dad, you're so uncool, get out. So yeah, that humiliation is something you have to overcome. But I think it is a combination of just putting yourself out there. And I don't mean, by the way, pitching everyone that walks past you. I mean putting yourself out there and putting your soul out there, sharing with passion what it is you're trying to do, listen to people's feedback. People love being listened to. It's companionship, the breaking of bread, and conversing is an art that we seem to be losing quite quickly as a race of people. We need to get back to that. But put yourself out there, do the hard yards, and don't be at all afraid of getting something wrong, whatever you do.
Love it. Al, you've been my everyday founder. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Cheers, mate.